Attention.
It's time to register for Ellucian Live 2024, April 7th through 10th in San Antonio, Texas. Illuminate, innovate, inspire, explore higher education's greatest opportunities with future-ready ideas, solutions, and best practices designed to drive transformation. Register now at elive.ellucian.com. This conference is going to be
Epic.
By now, you've heard me talk about Insights EDU in Phoenix, Arizona, February 20 through 22nd. Here's why I think you should join us at the Insights EDU conference. It's one of the few conferences focused on helping schools serve today's online and non-traditional students. If you're concerned at all about where your enrollments are going to come from in 2024 and beyond, and you should be concerned, you need to be at this conference. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50.
Prepare to be astonished.
Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we continue to make education your business by providing you this amazing platform to talk about the great work leaders in higher education are doing to serve students today. Oh man, so much conversation about what the value is of higher education today. That's why I think it's such a great honor to be able to interview these leaders in higher ed who are at the front lines of I would say rebranding, remarketing, reimagining what value of higher education means. And what does it mean? Well, we know statistically it means a better life for people to go through higher education. We know we need to get more people into post-secondary education. And I don't know that there's a group of schools that is more prepared to do that than today's community colleges who are really serving students of diverse backgrounds all across the nation, particularly in New York. There's a big system called CUNY. It's a group of colleges. You probably know this because we've interviewed, let's see, who have we interviewed? Felix Matos Rodriguez, I think we had him on. We've had my guest co-host on. We've had Claudia Schrader on, and the list goes on and on. We've had so many amazing people from the CUNY system, so we're going to keep it going today. But first, I want to bring in my guest co-host. She's back. I can't remember what episode she was on, but it seems like it's been a couple of years since we came and ran into each other. In fact, if memory serves, I think my guest was like right at the beginning of COVID. She started a president, and the name of the episode was something like two-dimensional leadership, because she had to meet everybody through Zoom for the first however many months. I'm going to go and check my memory, but I'm pretty sure that's what we talked about. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen. Her name is Dr. Christine Mangino, and she is back. She, of course, is the president of Queensborough Community College. What's going on, Christine? How are you?
I'm thrilled to be back. And I think it was episode 300 or 301. It's definitely talking about my first 6 months of being in Zoom and getting to know the campus in a bunch of boxes. So
yeah,
I'm thrilled to be back and very happy to be in person with everybody on campus now.
Yes, I'm going to go back and check my memory, but I remember talking about you transitioning into a presidential role, having to go through your listening tour with everybody on screen. That we were right kind of post-COVID, maybe in the middle of COVID when we were...
It was August of 2020, so it was really trying to figure out how do you build trust on campus when they don't really get to know you well, and how do you do that?
Yeah, building trust on campus, even when you get to see people, is still something that we have to work on, isn't it? One person that I think that has done that effectively in his career, and is this guest who we have with us today. In fact, I think he's been at this college for quite some time now in various roles. We're going to have to find out about that pedigree. Ladies and gentlemen, he's your guest today. His name is Dr. Vincent Boudreau. He is the president of the City College of New York. Vince, what's going on? How are you?
Thank you, Joe. And thank you to all the members of the audience for that enthusiastic welcome. I really appreciate that.
It's a large audience. In fact, I just recorded myself clapping about 50 times and then spliced it all together. No. Hey, before we jump in, I literally just hit me. I had the founder and CEO of Urban Arts on my podcast. And he was talking about, I think it was your school, City College of New York, where they're doing some kind of urban arts program that they have. Does that ring a bell?
We have an urban arts program. Urban arts is also involved in a relatively new, I'd say like 2 years, a gaming program that we
That's
have.
it. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, the mayor has decided to kind of jumpstart the gaming industry in New York City. Gaming is, responsible for 6 times the GDP as the movie industry. So it's huge. And
Surprise.
so we bring in students from high school as competitors in gaming competition, but we also have the graphic design and the computer design to then bring them into a degree program that gets them ready and capable of actually building games. And I mean, recreational games, but also games that are being used in training and educational as well. So very excited about that program. And urban arts
he was saying, and we haven't even released the episode yet. That's why it's so fresh in my mind. But when it comes out, he was saying there just wasn't the schools in the New York area that were offering a degree in gaming, and you guys teamed up to do something like that. So tell us more about City College of New York. What do you do? How do you do it? How long you been there? Give us the story.
So I personally, this is my 33rd year at City College. I came graduate school into the CCNY political science department as an assistant professor, and I've never left.
Amazing.
I came in at a time when, I was I think I was 26 years old when I came in. CCNY had not hired in numbers since the late 1970s, when we fired everyone who didn't have tenure because of the crisis of New York. So I come into the college at a point where there's almost nobody my age. And the people that had been around for 25 years really didn't want to run a lot of things. So I was, in my second semester, I was running a master's program, pretty quickly moved from that into, associate dean of social sciences. And I was chair of the political science department. And that's where I was when our Colin Powell Center, which had been organized in 1997, but never really got off the ground. They came to me in 2002 and asked me if I wanted to run it, and said that I said for 3 times I said no, and then it turned out that they had accepted funding for that center, but hadn't done anything with it, and the funding agency was coming to kind of check out what the Colin Powell Center was doing, and it wasn't doing very much. And so what I said in accepting it, I said, I want to change the profile of the center to a student leadership and support. We had at that time virtually no substantial scholarships on campus. And so working on that project and with some great people in the college, and General Powell was involved as well, we took that little center, our original scholarship cohort had 8 students. And eventually that became the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. I was the first dean of that school. It now has 4,000 CCNY students in it, 16 different scholarship lines. And it's one of the things we're really proud of at the college. And so I was running the school as dean when the presidency opened up. So I've just had the chance to kind of pay attention to City College from every angle. And so didn't have Christine's problem when I came into the job as president. Everybody knew me and knew me through the COVID period as well. So in that sense, I've had in some ways an easier run of it than a lot of my colleagues who came in during COVID.
So you've been there for 33 years.
Yeah, don't say it like that.
33 years, which is impossible because you look like you're, 27 years old. I mean, look at this guy. He's in great shape.
Yeah, what do you see my portrait? It's aging badly.
How many years as president?
This is my 7th year, if you count 13 months of interim.
So the fascinating part and the question I have for you, I mean, when you've been somewhere for so long, they talk about leadership is something that comes in stages, right? You've seen it from so many angles, probably complained about some of the leadership or thought perhaps things might change. Maybe you didn't complain, but thought maybe things could be done differently, or you were on challenge the status quo. So you've seen it from that angle. Now you step into a presidency. You've been there for 7 years. What's the secret to longevity in higher ed and, in all your various roles? And the reason I ask is because, it's hard to find good people in higher ed, to bring them into higher ed. And many of our colleagues are leaving higher education, and many don't want to work at the highest level. Presidency is under fire right now. What's your secret?
Well, okay, so City College, you know, has been known as the Harvard of the working class, right? That was our moniker, you know, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. In my first months on campus, you know, every one of my senior colleagues, one way or another, would work into their conversation. You know, we have more CCNY graduates that are on the board of Fortune 500 companies than any other college in the country, except for, I think the Wharton School was ahead of us by one. And there was no evidence of it on campus at all. There was no named buildings, no scholarship programs. Philanthropy was a weak part of our profile. And I just thought from early on that we had lost our sense of ambition for the place, you know, and so coming, you know, at every stage of the game, I thought we could be better. And I thought that being able to convey that message, particularly, you know, as I said, I was one of the very first people hired in what became a new wave of hires through the late 1990s and into the 2000s. So I was in a position to sit down with applicants and say, you know, if you're going to work here, here's what you have to understand about this place and our ambitions for this place, and you know what I expect of you. And you know, one of those ambitions was to be, one of those requirements was to be kind of absolutely ambitious for what the college could be and what is. So this is why I, you know, going back to the Colin Powell Center that had been moribund for about 4 years, I thought, boy, if we can't create something with a high public profile, with the support and the association of Colin Powell, then, you know, then we can't do it. And so this was a shot at saying, let's turn this quiet program into something with a real profile. And I think I started that work. The current dean, Andy Rich, has carried it on. And so, you know, coming into the presidency, I came in at a moment, it was before COVID, but, you know, my college was in a little bit of a leadership crisis, and there was a fair amount of discouragement among the faculty. And I thought, boy, this vision of mobilizing the energies of people behind the original mission of City College, you know, the founding mission of educating the working class and you know, propelling social mobility and saying to people, whether they would have said it or not, you're not at CCNY just to have a job. You know, you're in this specific campus in our Harlem neighborhood, working with our specific demographic because that mission matters to you. And I think when I said that, some people said, yeah, that's exactly what I think. And I think some people thought, well, maybe that is what I think. But you know, mobilizing that was made everything else possible.
Tell them like it is.
When somebody says, what do you do every day? From now on, I'm going to say I mobilize the energies of people, because that literally, that's what you said. And that is what we do every day, isn't it? If you're a leader, it is so true. Christine, over to you.
Yeah, so building off of what Joe just said, right, being there for 7 years, research shows that it takes a college president at least 10 years to transform an institution, right? So where would you hope to be 3 or 4 years from now?
You know, it's funny. I came in and I set a vision of doing a lot of things that, and then we had, you know, then we have the pandemic, and now Christine knows we're pulling the pieces together of a pretty serious budget shortfall in so you've got all of these headwinds that you're working against.
Yikes!
But my original vision was, number one, build a philanthropic operation that will stabilize the college, you know, whatever the ups and downs of state funding is. And that started with, you know, I can get way into the weeds on this one, but we had 2 foundations that needed to be combined. We had donor files that were a total mess. We didn't have the apparatus to build that operation, and it's taken about 4 or 5 years to get just the back end operation to where we needed it to be. It's where we need it to be right now, and so that's good. we had an adult education and workforce development program that was moribund. And so what that meant was, as an institution, we weren't focused enough on the needs of the workforce. And City College is a school with advanced science, engineering, architecture. So there are very, very skilled positions that the local economy needs us to provide. And I just thought we weren't really in alignment with them, and we needed closer relationships with industry. And so I'd say we're about halfway there. And then the other thing that was a real big part of my original vision was, we had an engineering school that was 100 years old and had never commercialized anything that was developed in the engineering school. And I thought we needed to build a commercialization apparatus. And as you see, every one of these things does that I've talked about so far does two things. It focuses the work of the college on the needs of our society, but it also provides for an alternative revenue stream. And I thought both of those things were absolutely crucial. And then the final element of it was, I thought we were insufficiently connected to our Harlem community. And I thought, we're a stone's throw away from Columbia. And I think at City College, we always kind of comforted ourselves by saying Columbia is up in the clouds and we're kind of, we're down at the same level of the people. We've got dirt under our fingernails and all of that. But that's not what our community thought. I mean, we were as inaccessible to many of the people that live down the hill from us in Harlem as any other institution. And so building those relationships has been really important to me. So I think, to get back to the question, we've built the apparatus for our philanthropic operation. Now we've got to, establish a track record and just thicken up the networks that we're working with. We're about halfway through that commercialization effort. We've got a really good, mostly funded project to build a facility just off campus and flesh that out. We have now the Charles Rangel Workforce Development and Infrastructure Initiative, which is kind of the tip of the spear of our workforce development program. That's about 3 years old and gathering momentum and really great relationships with our community that I think are providing more and more opportunities for members of our campus, students, faculty, and staff to do meaningful work off campus. So that feels, we're 6 years in. I should say I'm 60% towards those goals. I don't think we are. I think we're more like a good 50% there. But I think the feeling that people have, and I mean particularly our alumni, about City College has gotten better. I think we spent a lot of time really thinking about what our external messaging is and gathering the data to tell our story. So that feels like the best part of what we've done, because we were in a little bit of a public relations free fall in 2016.
So a lot of that is all external, right? So one of my questions that I had for you, and you just led into it, is like, how do you balance the off-campus and the on-campus parts of the job, right? That's something I struggle with.
Yeah, I think I have something that you didn't have, which is coming into the job 27 years. I mean, everybody knew me, and I had gone from a pretty isolated position as a young faculty member in a department. By the time I was working in the Colin Powell Center, our remit was campus-wide. So I was kind of unique, right? Everyone complains about how siloed academic institutions were. And here I was, working with engineering and architecture and science. And it was really cool because, as a young guy, I was interested in science and I was interested in, how things got built and what architecture looked like. But in your professional life as an academic, you narrow down and you narrow down and you narrow down. So I wasn't even, as a faculty member, I wasn't even involved in like 75% of the things that my colleagues were teaching in my discipline. And then all of a sudden, you get to tie what you know about political science to engineering and astrophysics and all this other stuff. So that was really cool. And so coming in, I think people knew me. I knew them. There's always a suspicion that, as a political scientist, on a school that's really known for its STEM fields, that I was going to turn away from the engineers and from the scientists. And some of my early meetings, that was kind of explicit on the table. And so exactly, I spent lots of time in their laboratories and going to their lectures and using some of the connections I made off campus to elevate their work. I mean, today I came into this conversation from a meeting I had out at Stony Brook with ARCTech, which is the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center. I'm on the board there, and that helps me open doors for our scientists and our engineers as well. So that was really important. And then I think the other thing was, as I said, I came into the college at a time when there was a fair amount of turmoil. And because of that turmoil, suspicion about, where the money was and who's getting paid a stipend that they shouldn't get. And we just opened up all the books. We opened up everything. And that was really important. I remember also early on in my first, say, 3 or 4 months, there were these white papers that would circulate, why isn't the president doing this? Or, so-and-so in this department is involved in some sketchy stuff, and why doesn't the president look into this? So finally, I wrote a note to the campus, and I said, this is the last time I'm going to respond to a blind item. And I'm committed to an administration where you're not punished for speaking your mind at Faculty Senate. And so that's where you get to talk to me about these things. And I never saw another one of those. They just were not circulated after that. And so I think it's a combination of, well, I guess the other thing I should say is, if you think about what a president's job is in comparison to a provost's job or a dean's job, in a lot of places, the president's job really is oriented towards external relations. And for my first 5 years, it just simply wasn't possible. There were so many fires to put out that I was deeply involved in, all manner of decisions. And that meant I got to know a lot of people, and they got to figure out how I did my work. I'm at a stage right now where I think I'm going to start readjusting that to concentrate on the stuff that's in the remaining 50% of my original agenda, and that requires me to be sort of off campus. But I couldn't have done that in the first 5 years. The first 5 years was all about establishing trust, building programs. So it's, I mean, as you know, Christine, it's what keeps us up all the time. Like, what is it that's going on under our noses that we don't know about, that when it comes to light, people are going to say, why didn't Vince know, or why didn't Christine understand that this was a problem? So
This is lunacy.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not. For a third straight year, the EdUp Experience will be recording live at Illusion Live 2024 this year in San Antonio, Texas, April 7th through the 10th. Illuminate, innovate, and inspire. That's the framework for the conference. Leaders from institutions around the world will converge at Illusion Live 2024 to discover game-changing technology, share industry insights, and build powerful connections. It's time to explore higher education's greatest opportunities with future-ready ideas, solutions, and best practices designed to drive transformation. You can register now at elive.illusion.com.
Epic.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard me talk about the Insights EDU conference. Well, let me tell you 3 reasons why I think everyone listening should join us in Phoenix, Arizona on February 20 through 22nd for Insights EDU. 1, it's one of the few conferences focused on helping schools serve today's online and non-traditional students. 2, you can expect a mix of speakers you won't hear anywhere else, including higher ed leaders from Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, and more. And reason 3, Insights EDU has an agenda packed with sessions discussing the latest trends in higher ed leadership, marketing, and enrollment management. Register now at insightsedu.com and use promo code EdUp to save $50 off your registration.
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask a follow-up there, because it's the old saying, like, you got to get your house in order before you have people over for dinner, right? So you as a president, you see operational problems. You know that you need to focus on it, but you also know hanging over you there is this community piece of what you do. So you talked about it a little bit, but go back to what you were saying about, and I wrote it down, the community relationships and the external messaging, right? So you've got, at the point where you have internal operations that need to be fixed and an external messaging and a rebranding, so to speak. That's the true balance, right? Because it's almost like you have to figure out what you are so that you can communicate it effectively.
Right.
And is there a point in which you go, who are we? Who are we really trying to serve? Did we have mission creep in here somehow? Do we entrench? When did that happen? Where you said, we need to sit down and think about this?
Yeah, and that actually happened for me years before I came into the presidency, right? And going back to the Colin Powell Center and then the Colin Powell School, we had this fantastic board of advisors, mostly people that General Powell brought. So at one point we had Barbara Walters and Tom Brokaw and Elie Wiesel and Henry Kissinger, and then finance guys like Steve Schwarzman and David Rubenstein, and so at that stage, when someone said, what would you like the Colin Powell School to be, or the Colin Powell Center to be, what my answer, as early as 2008 was, when anybody in New York City thinks about public service leadership development, I want them to kind of look north and see the Colin Powell Center. And I wasn't thinking that I was going to be president, so I wasn't concerned as much about City College. I was concerned about my thing. But that's absolutely transferable to the vision of the college and the things that we had to do. Be more ambitious about telling our story. Be really strategic about thinking about who should be interested in the work that we do, beyond our alumni. I think we get constrained into thinking the people that graduated from here are the people that are going to understand us and support us. But anyone who's interested in democracy in New York City or beyond has to be interested in CCNY and all the CUNY schools. I mean, we're all doing the same work. We've all got some version of our nation leading social mobility numbers, and we just weren't telling that story. So I brought all of that into the presidency, and so on day one, my very first job as interim president, I spent 12 o'clock talking to the faculty council, a meeting that was already scheduled, laying out my vision, day one. An hour after that, I had to meet the board of our foundation, previously scheduled meeting, vision for the foundation. And then that night was the annual gala of our alumni association, and where the former president was to speak, and then it was up to me to speak. And so on day one, I was in all these different. I mean, those are like, in some ways, your three most important stakeholders, right? Your campus community, your alumni base, and your philanthropists. And just laid out the vision of what we were going to do. The operationally, though, what was really important, at the Colin Powell Center, we had done a lot of fundraising. So we worked a lot with the college's communication apparatus and the college's development apparatus. And so I knew that they were both rotten. And they were also not communicating with one another. So I changed the leadership of those two offices almost on day one. And then I took the person that had been working with me on external relations at the Colin Powell School, somebody that Christine knows really well, a woman named Didi Mozaleski, and I said, I want to unite these two offices, right? You're not going to be able to raise money unless you're telling a story, and you've got to be able to target the stories you tell the people that are interested in supporting the college. So make those offices the same office. And so we did that early on. And that was really important, and it matters that this person is an extraordinary talent with great experience and a real feel for the kind of work that we do at CUNY and at City College. The other part of the answer, if you'll permit me to go on a little bit longer on this, is Harlem is a very mobilized, politicized place. And when I was named as permanent, I said named, it kind of leaked out before the official announcement. The Harlem community got together and said, we don't like this guy. We don't know anything about him. They say he's been at City College for 25 years. How come he hasn't come down the hill and talked to Harlem? Even though as running the Colin Powell School, a lot of the projects I were doing were community-based, it didn't necessarily filter up to their consciousness. So CUNY actually delayed my appointment for about 2 months while I went around and sat with, the leadership of Harlem, elected officials, members of civic organizations, members of the Chamber of Commerce. And it was really funny. There was panic on this campus, people saying, how dare they? It's not their purview to do this. And I kind of shushed them and said, if you give me 2 months with these people, they're going to be our best friends. And sure enough, in fact, just before getting on this call, I hung up with him at 3 minutes before I logged on. Congressman Rangel called me up because, he has been one of the moving forces in provoking us to build this workforce program and infrastructure, and then going around and getting the funds to support it. And that's just one of about 10 things I could name that have come from closer relationships with the community. And all it really required was for me to say, we're doing the same work. And if you felt like you weren't a presence on this campus, that's going to change. So I've got an executive advisory board made up of community leaders. When we program our theater, we're in consultation with the arts community in Harlem. And it's just it's really just kind of built over time. And so those are two different answers. One about the operational positioning of the college and where communications feeds in, and the other, which is kind of more on my shoulders, how we cultivate the kind of interpersonal relationships with a community that turned into programmatic collaboration.
About, telling your story. Do you have a favorite student story?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I forget, we're not, I was going to show you something for the video.
Does it start with 32 years ago?
No, but it does start with about 25 years ago.
Wow.
I used to, when I was teaching the political science department, I very soon became aware that everyone who taught our evening classes was an adjunct. And I thought, we have no idea who's taking our night classes. They just don't, everybody in my, and again, remember, these were people that had been at City College for 25 or 30 years. They just weren't interested in leaving the campus after 5 o'clock. And so I thought every second semester I would teach a night course. And so right around that time, still as a congressman, Congressman Rangel initiated a fellowship program that would train graduates in international relations to prepare them for the Foreign Service for their graduate program. So I'm teaching this class in international relations the evening, and there's a woman who's really smart, who I'd never seen during the day. And so I asked her to stay after class so I could tell her about this fellowship. And so she does, and I'm talking to her, and right next to her is a guy who is asleep. And he would fall asleep about 50% of the time. And when he was awake, he said really smart things. But, when he was bad, he was horrid. And so I go through the whole thing with Carrie, who, by the way, wound up going to the Maxwell School and having a great career in the Foreign Service. And when I'm done, he opens one of his eyes and says, well, why don't you have that conversation with me? And I said, because you got to stay awake, man. I'm not gonna. And so he said, like, what would it take for us to have this conversation? I said, well, here's what you do. Show me what you've got for the rest of the semester. I had at the time, all of the money we had to allocate was graduation prizes. So once you graduated, you would get $500 or $1,000 or whatever. And so I went to a couple of donors right around that same time, and I said, I want to use this money to make it possible for a good night student to be a daytime student and to absorb the full experience. And so I allocated that money to Brad, to this guy. And really, really quickly, he was a little bit older. I didn't know it at the time. He's just about my age. And he was sleeping all the time because, this was the mid 1990s. He was doing AIDS outreach to underserved communities all through the South Bronx, mostly at night, going to clubs and that kind of stuff. So he was exhausted. But he very quickly sort of installed himself. There was a little lounge for students outside my door, as I guess I was chair of the department at that time. So he installed himself out there, and every day I would hear him talking to 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds about the life of the mind and how you got to take this professor and that professor, and doing like having the kind of conversations that our students didn't always have because they were commuting and they'd come in, take classes, and go home. So he built this whole kind of community around his charisma and his excitement about education. And then he graduated and he got a full ride into a PhD program at Columbia University.
That is amazing.
And this is a guy who had no idea, even why he was in my class. I mean, that was the first conversation I had when it was, why are you falling asleep and all this? He just said, I don't know where this is going for me. And I could fill 2 hours with similar stories. And part of the takeaway of the story is in our classrooms, you have no idea who's talented and who's not talented. The guy in back who's folding his arms and acting like he's there under protest is probably shy and doesn't know whether he belongs in your class. The guy who's asleep is probably working 30 hours sometime. And so this the necessity of us as classroom teachers and people running institutions to figure out how you pay attention to people who on the page or even at first encounter don't read as young people on the road to success. Colin Powell used to all the time talk about how he almost didn't graduate from City College. He didn't have the GPA to graduate. He was below 2.0. And then they took his ROTC grades, which were not supposed to be counted academically. They averaged in and he got, just over the line and he graduated. And that's half of our student body. So, that's something I've really carried with me, through my whole educational career is how careful you have to be to pay attention, and how easy it is actually to pull a student aside who hasn't really put themselves forward and say, hey, you're a really good writer. Did you know that about yourself? And most of them don't. Most of them have no idea, what their potential is, what their talents are. I used to teach summer school at Cornell University for like my first 5 years here. And every student in those classes who was smart came in the door knowing they were smart, and they would tell you that they were smart. And we just have the flip side of that. And that means that our institutions have this huge potential to develop that talent, but we've got to pay attention.
I like your style, dude.
You're in a hub. New York City's a hub, right? I mean, there's lots of people. And I started the episode by talking about the value conversation that we have in higher ed now. What's the vibe amongst the students, potential current of City College? Is higher education still worthwhile? Am I on the fence? Am I dipping my toe in the water at community college with a class here, class there, because I'm not sold on it? What are you hearing in the hub of New York City?
Our students are absolutely unconflicted about the value of an education, right? They are struggling to make it, to be able to pay for it. Yeah. We have right now, as we speak, we have 800 students who have registered for classes who haven't been able to pay last semester's bill. And
no way!
We're trying to figure out how many of these can we keep, bring along and put on a payment plan? For how many of them is their bill so big that it's out of reach? But it's funny what happens so much, and you see it in food and you see it in opportunity, right? Some kind of food that was available to poor people, and because it was discarded by rich people, gets discovered, and all of a sudden it's priced out of the range of poor people. You see it with neighborhoods. Gentrification is basically a neighborhood being priced out of the reach of the original inhabitants. And you see it with opportunity, right? Like all of a sudden, when we're opening up opportunities in places like CUNY and other state schools over the last 20 or 30 years, whatever it would be, now all of a sudden people who've got other resources are like, oh, college isn't really that important, but it's crucial for our students. They don't have a pathway. They don't have a plan B alternative to education. They don't have the kind of networks that get you into jobs.
Yeah.
They don't have the life experience where an employer looks at them and says, I'm going to take a chance on this kid. So, what was true for our students 80 years ago remains true. This is their chance. And what's nice about our university system is that there's lots of different ways you can enter. We've got community colleges. CCNY is a senior college, so we grant up to the PhD. We've got comprehensives, and students can actually move within the system as they develop stronger and stronger capacities. And that's really essential.
And it doesn't change just the student, right? It changes the whole student's family, right? It's
Oh, yeah.
life changing for the family.
Oh yeah, we say that. I say that at freshman convocation. I say, by your presence here, you're changing the entire history of your family. The recently resigned president of Harvard University, Claudine Gay, daughter of two City College graduates. The guy that just stepped down as the president of Yale University, son of a City College graduate. And in both of their cases, the parents that graduated from City College were the children of people that didn't go to college at all. And we see this time and time again, where a City College alum will come in and say, I'll say, where are your kids going to school? They're going to Yale and Dartmouth and Princeton. And I said, where'd your parents go to school? My parents didn't go to school. My parents worked in the garment district, or my parents were immigrants. So we all of us exist in this moment in a family's progress where their children will grow up in the expectation that education is part of their birthright, and a stable future is theirs if only they work for it. And that's not true for huge portions of our society.
Go ahead, Christine. You got another one for him before we start to wrap up?
So, at the beginning, we started off and you didn't answer it, right? What keeps you up at night besides the budget, right? Presidents are losing their jobs across the country, and not necessarily for anything that we do.
Yeah. So if you had asked me this question 6 months ago, I probably wouldn't have said the relationship between freedom of speech and the academic mission and the safety of our community. That's a huge issue. In fact, I spent the weekend writing something for our alumnus magazine as a way of responding to alumni writing in and saying, what are you doing to protect, Muslim students or Jewish students, and what's your stand on hate speech? That's a big one, and but I think it's a big one that's having a kind of a current moment here, right? I worry sometimes about, I talk about mobilizing the energies of people. If you don't have resources, you mobilize them with enthusiasm and the promise that something better is coming. And so I always worry about, like, how long are they willing to wait for the good things, right? And
which
so
usually means resources, hopefully, right? You mobilize them with energy, and then hopefully resources come later.
Well, but it also means, like, the thing you're promising them, which may not be state funding or tuition,
Right.
it could be something else. Like, when is that going to come into play so that they say, oh yeah, he said this was going to happen and now it's happened? My faculty and staff have shown themselves to be more patient than I could have hoped. And I will say, we can now point to some things that are moving in the direction of where I hope and where I promised they would go. So that's been enough to kind of keep things going. But it's a constant struggle of, I'm doing things because you said things would be better, and are they better enough to keep me doing them? So there's that. And then
I'm with you on that one. I keep saying I started the job in the middle of COVID. We weren't on campus, and then enrollment and budget. I love my job every day, but I just can't wait till I can tell people yes. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's...
Yeah. There's a hallway in our biggest building is Shepherd Hall, and in the hallway that you enter is all of the portraits of all the 13 presidents. And I walked down that hallway, some of them were president for like 30 years back in the 1800s. And I walk down that hallway and I look at them, and sometimes I think, like, you all must have had normal years. I haven't gotten my normal year yet. Every
That's a fact. That's a fact.
And then the final thing that keeps me up at night, it kind of gets to what I was just talking about as far as talent. I worry all the time about who we're missing and who we're leaving behind, and who's out there so our alumni include, Jonas Salk and Felix Frankfurter and Colin Powell and Andrew Grove, and not one of them came to college with success tattooed on their chests, right? And there's so much talent in our city. There's so much talent in sort of new Americans coming to the country. And every one of our students, to one degree or another, comes to college with imposter syndrome. And that will keep them out of opportunities because they don't believe they're good enough to put themselves forward. So I worry about that a lot.
Yeah, because you have to self-confidence build along the way, right? That's a prerequisite.
All the time. You got to keep telling students, you read that litany of alumni, and then you've got to say, number one, they're exactly the way you are right now. And you've got to really internalize that. Not one of them came to college with their trajectory mapped out for them. And they would probably be surprised as first-year students where they eventually wound up. And then you've got to say, and I know some of you think I'm talking about the person sitting next to you, but I'm not. I'm talking about you. And then they have to hear it like time and time again.
Surprise.
Yeah.
I find it to be one of the hardest parts of the job of working in higher ed. You hope that a student is just motivated. They're just going to sail on through, get good, great. And the reality is you're continually building confidence, because it is that lack of confidence, not a lack of ability. Yeah. It's a lack of confidence that somebody buys into that makes them exit, right? Because then they use a justification. Like, I have no confidence that I could do this, so I can't afford it anymore. Or I have no confidence I can do this, and the $50 bill that I have, I just, I can't afford it. So it turns into something else, but I find at the root, it's always this belief of whether I can do it or not, or believe whether I can finish.
Yeah. And knowing learning is hard, right? And messy. I keep telling students all the time, if you're learning a hobby, right? You want to learn how to play the piano or how to go skiing, it's going to take you months and months and months, right? But if you sat through a class and you didn't get it the first time, you're like, you're dropping it because it's not good enough for you, right? That it takes just as much time. You have to give yourself that permission.
Yeah, and everybody on campus, public safety officers, administrative assistant in an office, a faculty member, or a member of the upper admin, every one of us has the capacity with one interaction of driving a student out of college. It's
so true.
It's that fragile. I was in my PhD program, in the second semester of my PhD program, in a class, an international relations class, and I asked a question, and the professor, who actually graduated with his PhD from CUNY, the professor looked at me and said, "Well, if you think that's an interesting question, you're probably in the wrong program." And he was kind of playing it for laughs, but I got to tell you, with all of my confidence growing up in an academic community, that crushed me.
Outrageous.
And it was outrageous. And so if that was my experience of it, like, what more are students who don't have any of those reserves?
Good point. Well, we like to, Vince, we like to end our episode with two, one not so much question, and then one question. The first one, what else do you want to say about City College? Open mic. Anything coming up? Anything going on? Anything you want to say? Anything you forgot? You want to talk about your team? Just giving you ideas. Take a couple minutes. Brag on City College.
We are two things. We are in the final stages of opening up this commercialization facility on 126th Street in a purpose-built life science building. This is a place where our faculty, our students, and entrepreneurs will be able to come to develop their technology for the market. And it's, we're out on a limb. We've never done anything like this before. CUNY has not, at the level we're doing it, done this before, but it is absolutely the way forward for technology schools. And so this is a big, big deal for us. And then a fun thing, we are days away from signing a contract with the New York Knicks to make our gym the home court arena for their G League team. So they will be the Harlem Knicks, and everybody who cares about professional basketball at a level that they can afford will be on our campus paying attention to it.
That's cool.
Exactly. It's very cool.
That is cool. Well, what do you see for the future of higher education? Your last and final question today.
We got to figure out how to sort the difference between the state schools that are doing the lion's share of education in this country and the private schools that everybody knows where all the resources are going and they're educating a fraction of our students. Like the experience on our campuses at CUNY demonstrates that the utility of the people that graduate from our colleges is not in the least a step behind, what happens in these private colleges. We're educating students at the senior college level for $7,000 a year. And Christina, community colleges, what is it? It's under 4,000, right?
800, yeah.
Yeah. This is a revolution in provisioning our society to be competitive in the future. And the imbalance between the resources that go to places that are educating 80% of the nation's college-bound students and everybody else is just absolutely striking. And we're also getting to a kind of a breaking point, I think, in public higher education where, states have gotten out of the business of supporting public higher education. Not entirely, we're still grateful for every dime we get from the state, but in every single state of the union, the diminution in that funding is at an order of about 30 or 40% over the last 20 years. And economic development depends on us providing a trained workforce, and we can't continue on the road that we're going.
I just want to say, from my perspective, interviewing so many people across higher ed, there are people out there that are connected to this podcast, or 2 degrees of separation, 1 degree, that give to higher education institutions. And getting back to the New York vibe, I remember Bloomberg gave like $1.5 billion to Johns Hopkins, and you just go, what? Johns Hopkins doesn't need any of that. They've already got billions. Why not give it to an institution where that money, or 10 institutions where that would have sustained them for the next 100 years? It's like having a small business, where Jeff Bezos is selling something on Amazon, and right next door you've got a small business struggling that offers the same product at the same price, blah, blah, blah. Do you just go and give it to the big company because, you buy for local, and that's just something that higher ed has to grapple with. It boggles the mind how Harvard takes in some of the donations that it does when other schools could benefit our population so much more.
Yeah. And two responses to that. I mean, it just so happens we're recording this minutes after CUNY announced the biggest private donation to the university, a $75 million donation from the Simons Foundation. That's going to
about time then, right?
It's great.
Darn it.
But the second thing is, a little bit of this is on us, right? Because I think we have, we're developing a voice to explain how essential we are in economic development and in the maintenance of our democracy. But we're not there yet, and we have to be better, more persistent, louder at making people understand that it's public state schools that are accessible to the vast majority of young people that maintain our democracy and hold our society together and keep the economy growing.
Yeah.
Well said.
And they don't have the money, right? I tell people all the time, 85% of our students stop out if they have a balance for tuition between $500 and $1,000. Any one of us could take that money out of our pocket and help change the life of a student, right? But 85% of students stop out for that small amount of money.
Yep. Well, we're going to have to continue to work on it together. And you actually think about it in terms of, we were talking about 75 million, what an accomplishment. But considering some of the donations you see in higher ed across the universe, more can be done. But big donors out there with lots of money, if you ever want to give, CUNY is a good place for it. I would tell you, because I know a lot of the leaders there and the work they're doing, and blood, sweat, and tears, literally going into serving their students. One of those individuals is my guest co-host today, now first-time guest co-host. We'll see if she wants to come back again. She knows she can anytime. Ladies and gentlemen, she's the one and only Dr. Christine Mangino, and she is the president of Queensborough Community College. Christine, thanks for coming back 2 years later.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Anytime. When the guests have connections like you do with guest co-hosts, and the guests have connections, obviously it makes for an incredible episode. With our guest today, you know him, now you love him. His name is Dr. Vince Boudreau. He is the president of City College of New York. Vince, I have to ask you, did you have a good time on the podcast today?
Had a blast. It was such a pleasure to be here with my good friend Christine. We've got 26 leaders of CUNY institutions, and Christine is one of my absolute favorites. So it was a real pleasure to be here with her and to meet you too, Joe.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. You've just EdUp'd.
Attention.
It's time to register for Ellucian Live 2024, April 7th through 10th in San Antonio, Texas. Illuminate, innovate, inspire, explore higher education's greatest opportunities with future-ready ideas, solutions, and best practices designed to drive transformation. Register now at elive.ellucian.com. This conference is going to be epic. Hey there, higher ed leaders. Are you thinking about joining the EdUp Experience podcast at Insights EDU on February 20th through 22nd in Phoenix, Arizona?
100%.
I thought so. This is the go-to event for higher education marketing and enrollment management. At Insights EDU, you'll gain cutting-edge insights from industry experts, including speakers from companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, Salesforce, and more. Become the transformational leader your campus needs by participating in discussions on important topics like online student demands and preferences, increasing affordability and accessibility, branding, measuring marketing performance, and much more. Insights EDU is the conference you need to attend in 2024. Register now at insightsedu.com and use the code EdUp to save $50 off your registration.